Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Danny Rood toko ingoa. Thanks for coming. I was a little nervous that there'd be like a 4-person and like someone's grumpy uncle in the corner, but it's a good start. So, as Nicole said, my name's Danny. I work at Toitua Envirocare. It's a role I moved from Wellington to start a year ago. Before that, I was freelance photographing for a couple of years. Before that, I worked at Ministry of the Environment for 4 years, doing a mixture of water, climate and youth engagement. And before that, I was attempting to live overseas unsuccessfully. And before that, I sold my soul and worked in the oil and gas industry for 4 years. So I worked for an organisation called OMV, who are Austrian, and before that I worked for a group called MB, or Crown Minerals. And before that, I was doing climate research and communications with GNS Science. That stems from the Environmental Studies, Geology and Geography degree. So when this opportunity came up, I was like, well, that's a reasonably varied background for some people, so I think I'm in a reasonable position to talk about some of this stuff. I describe myself as an environmental person, and it's kind of optimistic, but also scared shitless. So some things I'm going to talk about tonight, the problem of climate change, why it's a problem, if I have the potential to have slides, headings that don't have problem on them, avoiding that might be a problem. The fun of being a massive hypocrite when it comes to all this, a carbon footprint versus a carbon shadow, bathtubs, because we all like a bit of tub stuff, and systems change in the vaccine, what better might look like, and some things to remember. So climate change, ChCh changes. We're seeing like some pretty significant increases in global temperature, and that's been driven by us. Anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions since the end of the Industrial Revolution, about 1840, have seen atmospheric carbon dioxide levels just keep going up. So we've always had climate change in the past. It waxes and wanes according to interglacial cycles and what the sun's doing. It sort of moves in different orbits and stuff. But what we're doing now is that on top of that, we're pumping so much stuff into the atmosphere, it's pretty much created a blanket to keep things warm and continue to be warmer. Other reasons or other ways that the planet is changing is due to land use change, so chiefly deforestation. We're cutting down a lot of trees. And those trees act as carbon sinks. Think of them as like big sponges that suck up the carbon dioxide. Our diets have quite a bit to do with it too. So we're thinking agriculture, a lot of land use there, water use, and we're clearing a lot of trees for the agriculture to, for the industry to keep going. Our modes of transport are quite carbon intensive too. General overconsumption. So we've got the world's best marketers telling us to buy things all the time that sort of attack us because we're, complicated, emotional beings that probably don't need to buy the things that they tell us to do, but we do it anyway to fit in and achieve status and make TikToks and stuff. And according to some people, cotton earbuds are a real big deal, and we should focus on that. So this is a graph, terribly presented, the red bit in temperature in Fahrenheit for some reason. But this is from an ice core from the EPICA project in Antarctica from 2008. And what we're seeing is a pretty good correlation of temperature and carbon dioxide. So that carbon dioxide is trapped in bubbles through the core. So it's like a 3 and a bit kilometre core, which is pretty decent. But what we're seeing now, if we come down, this is 800,000 years, 400 in the middle, and 0 being the present, is that the atmospheric CO2 is really driving up. So you can see what natural cycles look like, and if you ask me, that looks pretty unnatural. So why is this a problem? Can you see it? Sometimes if something's not in your vision, then you're not too worried about it. So it's making life on planet Earth increasingly difficult. It's making things scarce. That makes things more expensive, and it's stressful. We're seeing significant health impacts from air pollution and heat waves. So heat waves in Europe kill a lot of people. The air in parts of Asia is really, gets into your lungs, and you're causing a lot of respiratory illnesses. And we're interfering with natural cycles such as fresh water. So when we melt glacial water, that alters the system all the way from the top of a mountain out to the sea. And when there's no ice to melt, there's no water for things like irrigation or horticulture. And so that affects the economy too. Animal habitats are changing. So just today I saw a story, someone else might have seen it if you read the paper or the news or TikTok, that Kaikoura will be impacted by climate change as the warming waters push the ideal geography of those whales further south. So there'll be fewer people going to Kaikoura to look at whales because they're not there. They'll be here. So better for Christchurch tourism, I suppose. And then, the bees. Everyone gets a bit worried about the bees because they pollinate so much on the planet, and a life without bees would be a bit of a worrisome one for our food supplies. So we also have these things called albedo changes. So that's like the ability of the Earth to absorb and reflect. So somewhere like the ocean is dark, it will absorb more heat. Somewhere like Antarctica is white and pale and will reflect more heat. As the ice melts, that space is taken up by darker surfaces, so continues more warming, and you get these positive feedbacks going on. Albedo is different from libido. I'll just make that clear. That might still be an issue in a warming world. I'm not sure if we're not there yet. But ultimately, one thing to remember is that delaying action will cost more in the long run. It's kind of like when you got an infection, like a cut on your arm or something, like, I don't need to go to the doctor. And then like 2 weeks later, you got gangrene or something, or some rabid infection that antibiotics would have fixed if you stopped and took the time to do it. So getting to the crux of these things is the concept of just being a massive hypocrite when it comes to this climate thing. Like, it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to have an impact on the earth. Like this shirt came from overseas, so it was made from cotton from some field, and then it was shipped here. Like these shoes, even though they're like recycled plastic, someone had to make petroleum in the first place to create the plastic and before it gets recycled. So yeah, doing a little bit helps, but ultimately we're stuck in these systems that mean we're hypocrites. So in a classic case in point is electric vehicles. So just to get a gauge, like who here owns a car? Hands up. Couple of you, okay. So how many of you own a hybrid? Nice. How many of you don't own a car? Impressive. How many of you own an electric vehicle? You ain't got a bit of money, do you? Okay. So when you hear about people, quite often, when you talk about electric vehicles with people, one of the common responses is around the batteries. Like, the battery's made of rare earth minerals, they're from overseas, there's child labour, therefore it's bad. And it's like, well, fuck, if you think that's bad, wait till you hear about petrol cars. So, yeah, they're not ideal. There's no such thing as a perfect solution because everything has a footprint associated with it. But those are one of those sort of motor lobby talking points that mean that no action will take place if they get their way. Is regardless of what improvements you make, it'll be good enough. It won't be good enough, and they'll just keep putting more and more talking points out. So basically, they're trying to get you to disengage because nothing will ever be good enough. But that's a classic one. What's next? Basically, we're in a situation now is we've got this fossil fuel industry, which is represented by this Tyrannosaurus Rex, which has upturned this electric vehicle from the 1993 film Jurassic Park, directed by Steven Spielberg. And what it feels like is, we're trying to make these improvements, but we're up against this absolute unit, absolute monster, sharp teeth, no arms, can't really punch you, but it will stand on you. And we're Sam Neill just there with a flare, like, shitting ourselves. And you can make some efforts and distract people, but ultimately they'll keep trying to upturn these cars, turn over the EV because it's a threat to their status quo. So when it comes to the hypocrisy, we're all going to be a hypocrite in some way or another. But I think we need to rethink this. So if you have a look at it and think about carbon footprint. So who's heard of a carbon footprint before? Yeah, a couple, yeah, good. All right. So the concept of a carbon footprint, does anyone know when or where that started? A couple of nods, yeah.
Wasn't the plastics industry or something like that?
Close, yeah. The concept of the carbon footprint was started by a little group called BP. And their whole push on that is to shift the blame from corporate responsibility to personal responsibility, and that because you're not doing anything about your cotton earbuds, you're ruining the planet. And just letting them get away with this, they can just sort of just drop off into the background and keep doing what they're doing and cause things like the Gulf of Mexico oil spill. But because, you didn't change your plastic container, it's your fault. So that's where that came from. And it is a kind of useful tool in some ways because it, lets you see okay, I can cut things back if I eat less red meat or fly a bit less, etc., etc. But I want people to sort of shift away from that and start thinking about the concept of a carbon shadow, which has anyone heard of that concept before? Oh, great, breaking new ground, fine, yeah. So think about it this way, is we've got two people, person A and person B. So person A took 15 return flights this year. Person B took 5 return flights this year, and on average it was the same distance. So on paper, who's worse in terms of polluting the planet? A, yeah, because they took 15 return flights, right? And the other took 5. If my arithmetic served me well, it's 10 more. Okay. If we add another factor in that, is that the person who took 15 return flights is actually a climate scientist, and they've been working with these organisations of small, medium and large scale to reduce their carbon footprint, like their emissions, and driving them to more low emissions practices. So these organisations, thanks to the help of this scientist, have seen their emissions reduced by 15, 20, 25, 35, 45%. Not bad. Then you've got this other person who's only flying 5 return flights a year, but they're the marketing person for BP. So on paper, who's worse now? I don't know. But it makes you think about yeah, you can have these metrics of your behaviour, but it's like the shadow you're leaving behind you. So if you're working for an oil and gas company like I used to do, we had some sensational greenwash projects. So speaking back to whales, that we used to sponsor that and pay for DOC, the Cook Strait Whale Project. So that survey, when all the humpbacks migrate from up the coast and through the Cook Strait, we'd sit up on Arapawa Island and watch the whales go through and just record numbers and then go chase them. But that was our bit for the community and nature because we cared. But it was if we really cared, we'd do this full time. We also sponsored Kapiti Island, so not bad. So there's things around the carbon shadow as well, say what you eat, who you vote for, what you're sort of working on, how you volunteer and those kind of things, which I think they're quite hard to measure, but they're working and they're impressive. If you can build a community, say around the river cleanup, and you all drove there in cars, but Mr. BP's got an EV for some reason, and he drove off to make new billboards. Yeah, think about it that way. So bathtubs. Another way to think about these aspects is that the earth is a tub. Bathtubs are great. So in the faucet, the tap running is carbon emissions. So the earth can only hold so many carbon emissions. And so the emissions are going into the planetary system and into the atmosphere, and then ultimately spilling over. And that's what, hold on, let me, yeah, so that's what that mess is. That's too much carbon emissions for little old bathtub. And that's everything causing it. So we've got a range of things from transport, making things like steel, transmitting electricity, agriculture. The aviation industry only contributes 3% to that. So, yep, even though it's important, there's lots of other things that can change too. But basically, the question is, if you think about in your house, you've left the bath running, I don't know, grandma called or something, and you're at the back, and then you come back flooded the bathroom. So you've got two, in a very rudimental sense, you've got two choices. You can start cleaning up, or you can turn the taps off. What should you do? Yeah. So when it comes to what the system can take, we live in these systems where the taps are just running all day. And it's any danger of slowing that down a bit or turning them off, because it'd be a bit more helpful than just an endless stream of towels to clean up the mess we're making. So that's where we need these ideal solutions, and this is where the concept of a vaccine comes in. So it's a bit of a game changer. This talk is brought to you by Big Pharma, but and it's difficult because like we've talked about, even if I have recycled clothing and stuff, it had to be produced in the first place, and you needed to use energy and a lot of materials to do that. So we need to understand that many things are true at once. So you can fly places, but if you're doing good work to help others reduce their emissions, you might be okay. In fact, you probably are okay. Solutions need to be accessible to many, so got a couple of money bags in the audience have got EVs, but for most people that's kind of out of the question. So it's okay, how do we make the best choice easy and affordable? I don't know. Well, that's where you've got to really engage with government and take on these bigger industries. And if Greta Thunberg, if her job was, I'd stop using plastic coffee cups, no one would have heard of her. She went bigger. She's got an impressive climate shadow because she engaged, I don't know how many kids and how many adults and how many grumpy uncles to go on the other side. But that's pretty impressive, and that's a good example of what a strong carbon shadow looks like. And then with these solutions, so like the EV, yep, they're reducing emissions, but they can still be better. And just because there's still a few things not figured out, like it's an 8 out of 10 solution, you can still follow through with that. And you can figure out the rest later. And I think society's got this real problem that, if you're at uni and you get 8 out of 10 all year, that's 80%, and then that's scholarship stuff. And you get in the workplace and you do something that's 8 out of 10, and you give it to someone, and the first thing they do is like, why are these two things wrong? And I think this comes into this as well. It's like, well, hold on, it's not supposed to be perfect. Perfect doesn't exist. So if we can sort of shun that idea and just work on continuous improvement, we might get somewhere. But you need to move away from a bit of a technocratic approach to it, because there's only so many nerds, right? So if we can get some storytelling involved, so talking about those whales up on the coast, or down and further down the south, there's Hoi Ho, the yellow-eyed penguin on the $5 note. They're pretty impressive. Their habitats are going to be changed from climate change as well. If you live in Wellington, the weather will be warmer. Bureaucrats will be buying less coffee, so cafes will go under. Maybe. I can't prove that, but it's entirely possible. So, we're all going to be hypocrites in some way, and one example that would be around how much we consume. And there's stats out there that I think 80% of New Zealanders, what would you say is the thing they think can reduce carbon emissions the most? What's the thing they think that will tackle climate change the best? Diet? No, it's way more. Nah, that's eugenic stuff. I ain't going there. But or kind of in the right realm, sort of. It makes your eye roll. You're like, really? That's gonna. Yeah. What's the bigger theme there? Yeah. So 80% of New Zealand think that the key to solving climate change is recycling, which is pretty grim. And I think of recycling as wiping your ass. So it's something you should do, but it's not leadership. So yeah, do it, but it's not job done. So we need to change these games with a vaccine that makes us less hypocritical, and that the best choice needs to be easy. Focus on your carbon shadow. Carbon footprint, yeah, kind of useful, but the shadow you're leaving behind you, like Greta, that's where we're going to get the best change. Seeking perfect, that's just modern day denialism, and I'm sick of that. So small actions do matter. So yeah, you should do recycle and do use a keep cup if you're a consumer of coffee products. But if you think that's where it stops, it doesn't. You need to go be chasing bigger fish. And that's where I'm optimistic that taking an approach that flips the systems on its head. That's like, well, why is so much being created in the first place? Can we stop that? And make our choices easier, probably through some mass collective organisation and hard work. Then yeah, we might get there, but it's stressful, and you can't focus on every little thing to the 100% intensity, because I tried that, and then I had to see a psychologist for a year. So don't. It's really stressful, and yeah, you need to detach. And I'm always going to be a hypocrite in some sense. Like, I flew to Rarotonga last week to see my sister, but I was really lucky, and I managed to see 20 humpbacks over there, and the footage I've got that I've been able to share with people has inspired, I'm optimistic that it'll inspire people to do something and grow their carbon shadow. So yeah, again, not a perfect solution, but if it means a couple more whales, which are really important, because when they shit, the phytoplankton goes out, and that's what absorbs the carbon in the ocean. We've got to save the whales as well as the bees. Think of them as like bees for the ocean, but bigger, and they made a film about them in 1994, I think. Right, so the thing is, we need to change the systems, long and short. Thanks. Any questions? I can't see, by the way. It's really... Yeah.
What are your thoughts on, you're saying air travel is only 3%, carbon offsetting, the airlines get you to try and pay for that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so in general, we think about something called a mitigation hierarchy. So we want to refuse activities in the first place. And then it's like, okay, well, if I have to, I want to be doing it less often, so reduce. And then from there, we're like, well, okay, like an offset. So it's like the last best thing to do. It's like cleaning up a mess. It's better to not make the mess in the first place. some of those systems, what you need to, this is quite good because this is actually what I've been working on a little bit lately, is that Air New Zealand are one of the, they have a carbon offsetting scheme, and they need to make sure that the credits they're supplying are legit. You can't just be like, yeah, we've got some shrubs out the back, they'll absorb enough carbon, so if you click that, that'll counter for that and you're good. Basically, it's avoiding first, but as long as those, the credits created from projects are additional, like someone's going out of their way beyond business as usual to plant a heap of forest, you can offset. But what we're seeing in things like the emissions trading scheme is that emissions aren't reducing, it's just created a whole lot of farmers or land owners have created planted so many forests and they're just making bank, which is good for them, but we're not reducing our emissions. So reduce first and then you do the offsetting last, would be my response.
What are some examples of big fish we should chase?
Big fish you should chase. Probably talking to your local MPs and councillors. We've got an election coming up. I think it's just 2 white guys running. But yeah, ask them something that's not about a stadium. Ask them like, can you connect the cycleways? Can we get some buses and like be the best city in the country? I was just in Auckland last week and it was a nightmare trying to find a bus to get to the airport. You got to walk to Sky City. Like, shouldn't it be at Britomart? Those kind of things. Like, okay, can you make a society like the best choice easy? And you got to ask them like, hey mate, this is what I'm running. This is what I've looked for when I vote, and so are all my peers. What are you doing about it? Write to your. Does anyone here eat dumplings? Yeah. You know that Kung Fu brand at the supermarket? They're really good. But for some reason they come in a plastic tray, like biscuits. And so, I haven't sent the letter yet, but I've partially written one to be like, can you stop doing this because I'm not buying it anymore. Take on things like that, it might seem silly, but that's way more important. If they can stop like 80,000, 200,000, I don't know, plastic trays going out, that's way more of an impact than, you know, switching out your cotton earbuds. So things like that. Take on bigger organisations. Just, you know, say like, hey Apple, why did this come with so much plastic? Because en masse, it's ridiculous. Other things around carbon shadow, Pat's diet, like it's okay to eat meat. Like The Lancet is a journal that's produced some research saying you don't have to be a vegan for us to fit within the climate targets for a livable world. We just need to cut back quite a bit. So things like that. And your choice of transport, it's okay to drive, like, but it's like, if we could somehow change society that we weren't relying on cars as much. And I think the pandemic's been good for that because there's a bit more working from home. And I think Christchurch's got like the 2nd or 3rd worst air in the country now, which is, again, comes to respiratory problems. So if you can point out like a values thing, I know that when you have these discussions with people who tend to be more conservative are like, okay, you can't tell us what to do, but in a way, it's about creating better choices and you can try and engage with them like that. So give that a go. Cool. Yeah, good. Right, thanks. That was, I was a bit nervous, but I got it.